Thank you. What was the reaction of the women's movements to the First World War recruitment issue? Did they take any actions to prevent men joining? Did they disrupt any of the meetings? And were there any counter-reactions from the wives and mothers of men who were either intent on joining the British Army or were already enlisted and at times serving?
There wasn't a white feather movement here.
No, and there were a lot of women were engaged in the recruitment movement as well.
A lot of the suffrage societies had, started raising money for ambulances. The Haslams did the same, so there was a lot of support for the war. The Irish Citizens headline was "Votes for Women, Damn Your War."
Yeah.
And there was a lot of controversy because of the use of the word damn in that. But they didn't actually, it wasn't, in terms of because conscription wasn't here. There wasn't a move to sort of stop. Because you're getting the whole national issue coming in here as well about whether you join the British Army or not. So.
Well, my focus has generally been on the North, and there you have very much, the loudest voices are those in support of the war and so forth. But I think, as with all of these things, people are reacting and responding in different ways. But as throughout history and with all events, it's only the loudest voices. And, newspapers aren't going to really print very much anti-patriotic stuff at the beginning of a war. Again, they're not going to pay attention to that. There's that great drive at the beginning of any war to bring people together, So a lot of stuff, stuff might have been going on that wasn't reported, but there appears to be a general, shift in gear to get behind the war effort.
Margaret McCoubry did help people, I think, where they were being conscripted in Britain or something. She did something about helping young men to avoid conscription and was part of a bigger pacifist movement in the North and did speak a lot about it. Whereas other members of the same suffrage group then Dr. Elizabeth Bell went to Malta as part of the war effort. So you had, women who had been in one group doing completely different things very quickly.
You also had, in the early days of the war, the Haslam organisation. It got behind the war effort and it collected funds and made bandages and things like that, which were not the favourite thing from the point of view of the Irish citizen. They also endowed a bed which was called the Irish Women's Suffrage and Local Government Association Bed, which was in Dublin Castle Hospital. And in the early days of the war then, the Federation did support the war effort. I can't remember exactly now what way it did. It may have been bandages or collecting funds, but they very quickly stopped that. They supported it for maybe 6 or 9 months, and then they had meetings, and obviously some of the members were not happy with that. So they stepped back from that and said, no, in future they would be continuing to concentrate on the suffrage issue. So, but of course, most of them became pacifists, and they set up a pacifist, an Irish branch of an international, because internationally the women's movement split over the issue of war, and a pacifist organisation was formed, and Louis Bennett formed an Irish branch of that, which went on, and she was a member of it. There was an Irish branch that in existence until 1931. So, they were going down other roads, very much anti-war roads.
There was a couple of really important debates in 1915. Two things. One, Sylvia Pankhurst came to Belfast in 1915, and one of the other women was saying in letters to Hannah Skeffington, it's impossible to do anything here, everyone's knitting for the war effort. But down in Dublin they had a couple of big debates, and Thomas MacDonagh spoke at one of them, and it was condemning the British government for preventing women from going to The Hague as part of this big international anti-war conference that women internationally, who members of the belligerent countries, were trying to organise, and the British government prevented women getting there. Thomas MacDonagh spoke in favour of the women and condemned the government, but when he spoke, he also talked about his role as the director of training in the Irish Volunteers and how he was training women to bayonet their fellow man. And Louis Bennett was there and was absolutely appalled, wrote angrily to Hannah afterwards, saying, I'll have no more of these kinds of meetings. Pearce had said, well, this action by the British government should now bring the women onto the nationalist side. And they were talked about this terrible inversion. It should have put the nationalists onto the women's side. So there's all that debate going on. And at the same time, another debate when Markievicz was speaking and Connolly intervened at the end. Frank Skeffington was debating. And they thought that the pacifist point of view was going to win out, and Connolly spoke at the end and kind of swung the audience the other way.
So I think the whole socialist side comes into that anti-war.
Yeah.